The hero had never believed in the so-called light at the end of the tunnel. In the darkness, a small bright point flickered, just like in those rare cases when people on the brink of death awoke in a cold sweat, claiming they had seen the light. That tiny glow grew closer. Yet here he was, trapped in this so-called tunnel. How had he died? The bright point wavered, shrinking again. The last thing he recalled was being alone in his bedroom. A luxurious bed filled the room, and a man stood by the window. The hero had gazed down at the city from above, then pulled the blanket over himself. The moment he lay down, his body became unbearably heavy. Had he been poisoned? Assassinated? Gray forced himself to think. A knife rested nearby in its sheath. Many had wished for his demise. A sword gleamed inside a display case. Beside it sat a crown. Of course, he had been a king. But no matter how desperately he wanted to uncover the cause of his death, there was nothing he could do. He could only accept it. He hoped that, in the end, he wouldn't be greeted by a choir of chubby, winged cherubs. The light moved closer, growing brighter. Voices filled the air, offering congratulations to a man and a woman. They had a healthy baby boy. A blurry figure emerged. The hero had a sudden realization. He had just been born. The indistinct shapes of a man and a woman hovered nearby. The woman, gazing down at him, asked her husband to support her so she could see him better. The former king thought to himself, did this mean the light at the end of the tunnel was simply the light of childbirth? No, he quickly dismissed the thought. It didn't matter. The mother whispered that he was beautiful. The father commented that he had her hair. His parents looked at him with warm smiles. The hero realized that wherever he was, he understood their language, a promising sign. The mother's radiant, loving smile stirred something within him. He couldn't help but think how graceful and enchanting she was. She turned to her husband and noted that the baby had his eyes. The newborn found himself observing the man, his strong jawline, sword-sharp brows. He had assumed such features belonged to a stern and intimidating man. However, the father simply waved his hand with a bright grin, cheerfully greeting the baby, introducing himself as Daddy, and encouraging him to say it back. Ray chuckled awkwardly when his wife reminded him that the baby had just been born. The newborn decided it didn't matter. His gaze wandered. Pieces of armor hung on the walls. His surroundings seemed normal enough. His small eyes flickered toward a candle glowing in the corner, then back to the armor. His bright blue eyes widened in confusion. What? Alice held him gently in her arms. The boy wondered, where am I? Outside, in a clearing, stood a house with a thatched roof. Its white walls gleamed under the sunlight. The weeks dragged on. Ray held his wife close as she cradled their baby. Despite her warmth and kindness, Alice ruled over the household with a firm yet loving hand. Aside from the occasional playful antics, his father, Ray, was a reliable and charismatic man. Though the baby was grateful to be born into such a caring family, his previous life had been riddled with hardships he wouldn't wish upon even his worst enemies. He stretched his tiny arms and legs, struggling with the limited control he had over his fragile body. A faint green mist wafted from his diaper, a humiliating reminder of the complete loss of control that came with being trapped in an infant's body. Alice quickly changed him while he turned red with embarrassment. Perhaps it was the mental fortitude he had cultivated as a king, or the desperate hope that this was merely a dream, that kept him from losing his mind. Alice carried him through a bustling marketplace. It felt as though he had been thrust into a bygone era, a time far more primitive than what he was used to. His gaze fell upon a man wielding an enormous sword, and he wondered when it had become commonplace for people to openly carry weapons. Nearby, a shopkeeper bellowed about his wares, claiming his elixirs were excellent for stamina and selling them for just 2 coppers. The former king found it amusing that these suspicious-looking potions were being marketed as legitimate medicine. Alice turned to her baby, who sat quietly behind her, and asked if he was tired. He scowled at the question but heard her mention heading home. Just then, a customer eagerly exclaimed that she would take 3 elixirs for her husband. Later, the baby lay on a pillow, lost in thought. Knowledge is power. He had spent the past few weeks closely analyzing his surroundings, trying to understand the world he had been reborn into. He was confident he had pieced together a solid understanding of what to expect. Ray soon arrived home, smiling as he approached his son. Scooping him up in his arms, he grinned. "Daddy's home! How's my little one?" Without hesitation, he tossed the baby into the air. Alice gasped in horror, shouting at him, demanding what he would do if their son fell. Meanwhile, the baby felt a sickening wave of dizziness as his frail body struggled to handle the sudden motion. Ray let out a hearty laugh as he caught him, clearly amused by how easily his son had been overwhelmed. Holding the baby at arm's length, he reminisced about his own childhood, explaining that his father had done the same to him. He assured Alice that their son was having fun. However, the child, now turning an alarming shade of purple, screamed in panic, overwhelmed by the abrupt movement. Still chuckling, Ray spun him around again. Alice, clearly concerned, scolded him once more. The baby, now completely nauseated, let out another wail. In the chaos, Ray accidentally knocked his foot against the wall. For a brief moment, he stared at his son in growing dread, only to turn and find Alice approaching with a dangerously sweet smile. The baby burst into tears. She placed a glowing palm on his scraped knee, assuring him that everything was all right. A warm light radiated from her hands. The baby watched, mesmerized, as the wound disappeared before his eyes. Alice smiled as she lifted him into her arms once more. There, all better. The child gazed up at her, his thoughts shifting. He had been too quick to assume he understood this world. In truth, he knew far less than he had initially believed.